We're going to be comparing the performance of an R5 Ryzen 3600 on two different motherboards. You might be asking why? Well, there's some news that came out this week that was kind of interesting, where an article in Tom's Hardware was talking about how, because of some of the settings on the motherboards that motherboard manufacturers can manipulate, your CPU might actually burn out a little bit faster. I don't know how true that is, but there's a new variable you can see in some of the telemetry software you can download from HW Info. And that very specific thing that is new that you didn't have before is a little variable here, right here. It's called power reporting deviation. And it only works under full load, but it basically tells you whether or not what the motherboard's telling the processor is the amount of power it's delivering it is actually true. So if it's under-reporting the power being delivered, the processor may actually be consuming more power. So that's why they're saying that it could burn your processor out faster. I've got two different motherboards here to compare today. Alright, so first up to bat, it's going to be this B450M Tough from ASUS, and we're going to be trying that on the 3600. Let's see what its power deviation number looks like. So let's go over here now. Let's see what our power reporting deviation number is. 152.2%, 153%. Interesting. Our current number is 153.2%. Okay, this thing's getting hot. It's at 90 degrees Celsius. It's going to thermal throttle at 95 degrees Celsius. What does that mean, right? So the thing that this Tom's Hardware article was really concerned about was that the motherboards would under-report the power. So we were over-reporting the power. So that means our processor was actually being fed less voltage and less amperage than what it thought. So I know that we're reporting a positive number for the power reporting deviation, but to be fair, at this point on the Tough motherboard, we don't have the ability to manually put in a voltage. We have to use offset as the voltage to add when you set your frequency. That's what we got out of the ASUS Tough B450M. Okay. So now we're off to the next great competitor here. It's the Gigabyte B450M Aorus, or B450 Aorus M, whichever way you want to see it. This is a good board. This board has a lot of phases in it compared to the Tough board that we just ran. So we want to see what it can do. It's actually been able to let me get up to a higher clock of about 4.7. But we're going to run this board now, stress it, look at what the power deviation number is, and compare it. So we're in CPU-Z. All variables are pretty much the same. We're running at 4.55, showing here in Ryzen Master as well as 4.55. Now let's stress this processor. Processor under stress, if we're in HW Info, we look at our power deviation number, it's under 100. It's at 87.1%, and it's feeding the processor 1.368 volts. So now, while it's sitting here under heavy load, what do we see? Core VID is 1.319, which is different from this 1.368 number. We're in a manual overclock. You can also see here, we're hitting some very high temps, 93 degrees Celsius. But the core VID here, SVI2 TFN, 1.33 volts, which is lower than what Ryzen Master is showing. So, different board, different power deviation number that it's reporting. And that's going to affect the amount of current that the CPU is actually calling for, because it doesn't think it's pulling that much. It's under 100%. So it's not 1-to-1. So you know, the processor is probably getting fed more voltage than it thinks it is. So I think it's great that HW Info found that variable, came up with that variable, so we can watch what's really happening, because it's my first time overclocking a 3600 in the new Ryzen 3, and the voltages were all over the place. I could not get it to be something predictable. I didn't know what number I was looking at, but thanks to HW Info and their research, they've been able to do it, and I can actually compare board to board and know what's happening. So we're still using the Gigabyte board here. Same clocks, 455, somewhere around the same kind of voltage that we're going to be running, 1.35, somewhere in that neighborhood. But this time, so the last two tests I've done with the Tough board and the Aorus board were both on full manual overclocks, where I set the frequency manually and I set the voltage manually. Instead this time, I set the frequency, but I'm using offset for voltage. Take a look at this, which isn't being reported. Same board, same processor, same exact setup, voltage, clock, everything. Okay? Except this time, power deviation for the Gigabyte board is in the positive territory. 115% instead of the 85 that it was showing on the manual overclock. This is very different. And I don't think anyone's shown this yet. So even on the same board, you're going to get different power reporting deviations. This is an inverted power deviation number that it's showing. And at the same clock, I'll tell you right now, 455, I'm running about 4 degrees cooler than I was before. The benchmark number is about the same, okay, from what it was doing. So the actual processing that it's doing, the workload is about the same. But on an offset voltage, frequency set, compared to a manual, the power reporting deviation is different. That's interesting. So in summary, we've found that not only was HW Info accurate in saying that the motherboard varies from motherboard to motherboard, what it's actually reporting to the processor CPU, what the voltage is that it's feeding it, so it could potentially be eating more voltage or an amperage or not, is absolutely true. But the other weird thing that we found is that when it's a manual overclock versus a offset voltage being added, the power deviation, the voltage that's being reported to the CPU by the board, is different. And even on the same board, it's different. So that's something that you're going to have to take into consideration when you're overclocking. Now, is there salacious panic mode kind of headline here about reliability going down or your CPU degrading? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows at this point. But that deviation is there. Good, bad, I don't know. That's for professionals to conclude. Thanks for watching this video. If you like it, hit subscribe. At the end of the video is some overview information that's going to answer some questions for you about the setup. So hang out and watch that. Alright, just to verify what we've got for hardware here, and that all we're doing is comparing motherboard to motherboard, everything else being equal. We've got an RX 580 for our GPU. We're running 2 G skills at 3200 megahertz for RAM, 32 gigabyte total, 16 gig stick each. We're running a mechanical drive for storage, and we've got our NVMe drive as our boot drive. One little note, when you're doing this yourself, you want to try to have only one monitoring software up at a time, because when you have multiple monitoring telemetry software up at the same time, they're all asking for the information, so the processor's always having to report that data. And so like if you're trying to pull voltage, you want to have one piece of software reporting voltage to you, not two of them, because you may not be getting the real number that you want to get.